Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 8 stories, from rules stories to creepy houses, creepy movie theaters, and much, much more. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. These videos do take me a little while to make, even though I love making them. Let's see if we can reach 700 likes on this one. I know that that's a very high goal, but I think if everybody took just a quick second, we could do it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. Dropping a comment and letting me know what your favorite story from this video was is also very much appreciated, as I like to take the feedback and try and find more stories similar to it in the future. Sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. It was a humid August day, the air thick with the heavy scent of summer. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows on the street as I returned home from work. The city was unusually quiet, as if everyone had retreated from the heat. I opened the door to my third-floor apartment in the old residential building where I had lived since childhood. The interior was pleasantly cool, thanks to the thick walls that effectively kept the heat outside. I tossed the bag onto the couch and turned on the fan, which began to hum softly, providing relief in the stuffy air. I had barely a moment to sit down and relax when the phone rang. Jerry's name appeared on the screen, my childhood friend, with whom I hadn't been in contact for years. I answered instinctively. "Hello?" I answered uncertainly, wondering what could have prompted him to call right now. "Hi, Harry. It's Jerry. It's been a long time." There was something unsettling in his voice, something that made my heart beat faster. "Hey, Jerry, is something wrong?" I asked, trying to hide my surprise. "This isn't a conversation for the phone. Do you have time to meet?" We agreed to meet at my apartment at 10:45 p.m. That evening, as the sun began to set, I heard a knock at the door. It was Jerry. He looked different from how I remembered, pale with something disturbing in his movements. I opened the door and let him in. We sat at the table, and I let him speak. "Harry, I have to tell you something. Something that has been haunting me since that time," he began, his voice trembling. "Do you remember the rules of apartment number 12? I felt a shiver run down my spine, and my heart started to race. Jerry's words brought back memories from our childhood. The first time I saw him, we were 14 when it happened. Jerry lived on the lowest floor, where the bricked-up apartment number 12 was located. It was at the very end of a long corridor, with no other apartments nearby. Apartment number 11 was much earlier, closer to the beginning of the corridor, and apartment number 13 was only on the next floor. There was no other apartment above the bricked-up apartment number 12. My parents forbade me from approaching that apartment. I never understood why until that day. That evening, the sky began to darken faster than usual. Clouds gathered on the horizon, and there was tension in the air. In the distance, I heard thunder, heralding an approaching storm. I had arranged to spend the night at Jerry's place, who lived 2 floors below in the small residential block. I headed for the staircase. I began to descend the stairs, but at the very bottom I noticed a figure. I descended further. That's when I saw him for the first time, a man with a cigarette. I quickly passed him. Only after passing him was I able to take a closer look. He was standing on the staircase, his face pale, his eyes deep set, staring at me, or so it seemed. After a moment, he moved toward me. I quickened my pace, but before I realized it, he was already behind me. I feared what he might do, but he passed me, heading toward the door marked number 12. I watched as he approached the bricked-up apartment. Then something happened that I will never forget. The man with the cigarette stopped right in front of the door. Slowly, he reached for the handle. My eyes widened in fear and disbelief. The concrete wall vanished as if it had never been there. The man casually walked inside and closed the door behind him. A moment later, Jerry saw me through the peephole and invited me in. I didn't immediately tell him what I had witnessed. It wasn't until several minutes later, when we were alone in his room, that I recounted the incident with the mysterious man. He didn't hide his excitement, and suggested that we go there the next day, knowing that his parents wouldn't allow us to go anywhere so late. We agreed on 3 p.m. the following day. In the morning, we had breakfast, and I left his apartment, my mind preoccupied with thoughts of the mysterious man with the cigarette and apartment number 12. As the appointed hour approached, my heart began to race. I entered the staircase, and the atmosphere was strangely tense. When I reached the bottom, I saw Jerry waiting for me. Together, we cautiously approached the apartment. Jerry reached for the handle, but all we saw was a concrete wall. The apartment was bricked up. Jerry accused me of lying, his excitement turning to anger. Suddenly he stopped, standing still and staring at something behind me. I immediately turned around. There he was. The man with the cigarette stood right behind us, staring straight at the door of apartment number 12. I had never seen him blink. Suddenly, without taking his eyes off the door, he pulled something from his coat, a rolled-up piece of paper, which he extended toward me. Hesitantly, I took it from his hand, and almost immediately he turned and walked toward the staircase. I stood there, stunned, as the man with the cigarette handed me the paper and silently walked away. Jerry, noticing my inaction, suddenly snatched the paper from me and began to read it. Only when Jerry grabbed the paper and started analyzing its contents did I join him. The contents were handwritten, but it was clear that it had been written in a hurry. The letters were uneven, sometimes crooked, as if the writer's hands were trembling, trying to keep up with their thoughts. Some words were barely legible, smudged by the quick movement of the pen. The content of the note read as follows: Rules of apartment number 12. Remember, before you decide to explore apartment number 12, think twice. Rule 1. You can only ever enter the apartment between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. This is the only known way to access this apartment. Rule 2. When the clock strikes 3 a.m., you will have 5 minutes to leave the apartment. If you don't, you will notice that where the door should be, there is only a concrete wall. You will be trapped. If this happens, follow Rule 3. Rule 3. If you are trapped in apartment number 12, know that your chance of survival are slim. After a moment, you will hear wailing coming from the bedroom, growing louder with each passing second. Hide as quickly as possible and pray that it doesn't find you. You will be able to leave the apartment again at 11 p.m. Rule 4. Between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m., you can move freely around the apartment. However, remember that if you enter any room other than the one with the exit, always close the door behind you after leaving that room. Do not re-enter that room. If you do not follow this rule, you will soon hear a quiet wailing, and the apartment's exit door will slowly begin to close. Run to the exit as fast as you can. There might still be hope. Rule 5. In 1967, a woman with long black hair named Isabella was brutally murdered in the bedroom of this apartment. She was skinned and cut into pieces. After this incident, no one wanted to live in the apartment, and the building authorities decided to brick it up. However, for reasons unknown to me, the apartment can be accessed during the previously mentioned hours. So remember, if you hear quiet wailing, know that it's Isabella. Don't look at her. Don't turn around. She hates being watched. Hates being judged. Rule 6. Don't scream. It will only hasten your painful death. Rule 7. Never turn on lights emitting objects between 11:59 p.m. and 3 a.m. She is drawn to light. After reading the rules, Jerry couldn't hide his excitement. His eyes sparkled, and a smile betrayed his growing adrenaline. "We have to go there," he said firmly. We agreed to go to the apartment at 11 p.m. We told our parents that we were spending the night at our friend Ben's place on the second floor to study for an important math exam. They didn't mind, as it wasn't the first time we had stayed at Ben's. When the night came, the clock read 10:55 p.m., and with hearts pounding we tried to sneak out of Ben's apartment. Unfortunately, our footsteps woke him from his sleep. Groggy and confused, he asked where we were going. We told him about apartment number 12 and the rules written on the note. Ben frowned as he read the hastily written list of rules, then burst out laughing, unable to believe our story. But Jerry insisted, urging him to come with us and see for himself. "I don't believe you, but it wouldn't hurt to check," he finally said, visibly intrigued. "I'm going with you." Jerry nodded in agreement. The darkness of the night enveloped us, and excitement and tension grew with each step that brought us closer to apartment number 12. As we stood in front of the apartment, we made sure the corridor was empty. When Jerry reached for the door handle, the door opened with a quiet creak, and we held our breath, ready to see what we remembered. A solid, concrete wall that seemed to be the end of our journey. But as the door opened fully, we stood in shock. Instead of the cold, concrete wall that we both so clearly remembered, we saw an ordinary room. The room was dark, but fully accessible, as if there had never been any obstacle there. This is impossible," Ben whispered, his confidence dissolving into the air. I stepped closer, hardly believing my own eyes. Jerry stood beside me, just as confused as I was, his hand still resting on the handle. Finally, we snapped out of it and entered the apartment, closing the door behind us. All three of us took out our flashlights after entering the apartment. The first thing that caught our eye after turning them on was the damage. The walls were covered with a thick layer of mold, its dark stains spreading along the rotten surfaces. In some places, the plaster had completely fallen off, revealing the raw brick underneath, and some areas were literally eaten away by moisture. For a moment, I thought I could smell the sickly sweet odor of rotting wood and fungus, which made me nauseous. The windows, barely visible through the semi-darkness, were completely bricked up from the outside. The curtains, which might have been once decorative, were now just shreds, dirty, decayed, and so fragile they could disintegrate at the slightest touch. The furniture in the room was scattered haphazardly. Old armchairs and sofas were caked with dirt, their upholstery consumed by moisture. Trash and shards of glass, which might have once been part of windows or mirrors, were strewn across the floor. Sinister moisture stains hung from the ceiling. In one corner I noticed the remains of an old, broken chandelier, hanging miserably from a single, creaking chain. Every breath was a struggle. The air in the apartment was heavy, filled with dust and dampness. Yet in all this decay, one thing was most unsettling. The feeling that, despite looking abandoned for decades, the apartment had something in it that made me feel watched. We hesitantly explored what was once a living space until, finally, as we approached the door leading to the bedroom, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Jerry looked at me, his face pale and his eyes filled with fear. I felt that something terrible awaited us behind those doors, something we could not even begin to imagine. The smell of rotting meat hung in the air, making me feel sick and only intensifying the sense of unease. The door creaked open and we stood in the doorway. What we saw exceeded our worst nightmares. The bedroom looked like a scene from a macabre film. The walls were covered in bizarre, chaotic drawings made with blood and something that resembled dried shreds of flesh. In the middle of the room stood an old, decayed bed, its mattress torn and soaked with blood, which had dried over time, forming dark, sticky stains. On the bed lay something we initially took for old, tattered rags. Only after a moment did we realize it was a person. The body was in a state of decomposition, barely holding together. It was scarred, and in some places, its limbs were cut off. Its eyes, empty and lifeless, seemed to be staring straight at us. Then I realized who I was looking at. I was looking at Isabella. I ran out of the room as fast as I could. The sight of the decaying body made my heart pound wildly, and my stomach churned. I felt an uncontrollable shiver run through my entire body. Jerry reacted second. He turned abruptly and, almost losing his balance, ran out of the bedroom. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wide with fear. Before we reached the front door, I felt I could no longer hold back my nausea. I stopped, doubled over, and vomited onto the floor. My body trembled. I also noticed that, for some inexplicable reason, the apartment door was open. Moments later, Ben ran out of the bedroom, asking what was that. I didn't listen because I realized something that froze the blood in my veins. Ben hadn't closed the door behind him. Then I heard it. A faint, almost inaudible wail coming from inside the bedroom. The sound was like a moan, slow, full of suffering. Jerry and Ben lifted their heads and looked toward the open bedroom door. I wanted to do the same, but I remembered the rules. The fifth rule. At the same moment, my friends turned their gaze towards the bed. The wailing grew louder, turning into a cry of despair, and I felt pure survival instinct take over. I didn't wait a second longer. I ignored everything. I didn't care what Jerry and Ben were doing, or even if they were running after me. I thought of only one thing: run. I sprang to my feet, leaping over broken furniture and piles of trash. I ran blindly, barely noticing what was in front of me, my heart pounding like a hammer, and my head throbbed with adrenaline. Every step, every stumble in this abandoned, rotten apartment only spurred me to even greater efforts. Suddenly, I noticed the door leading to the corridor slowly starting to close. My heart stopped. I knew that if those doors slammed shut, we would be trapped in this cursed apartment, and the hope of escape might disappear forever. Jerry ran beside me, his breathing heavy, his movements full of panic. My heart beat in quick, almost terrifying coordination. Just as the door slammed shut with a loud bang, Jerry and I were already in the corridor. We tumbled out of the apartment, falling to the ground, trying to catch our breath. With a mixture of terror and relief, I looked at Jerry. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. Suddenly a cold shiver ran through me as I realized that Ben was still inside. I suddenly collapsed, struggling to stand, but my legs would no longer obey me. I fainted, collapsing onto the old, dirty corridor floor. I swear in that moment I fell, I saw him. A man with a cigarette stood at the end of the corridor, smiling at me mockingly. After those events, we decided to remain silent. It was a decision that came hard to us, but we considered it the only possible one. Ben's disappearance was reported, but he was never found. He vanished without a trace. But I still remember. I remember the mocking smile of the man with the cigarette, and that awful moan that haunts me in my nightmares to this day. And though years have passed, I still can't forget what happened to Ben, and I still feel the weight of the fact that he was never found. After Jerry and I finished school, our paths diverged, and I never saw my friend again, until that evening. Do you remember that horrible evening? That night changed our entire lives. Especially mine when I looked into the bedroom that night and I saw that... What did you see? I asked, worried. I saw Isabella. Her corpse slowly stood up on what used to be legs, and she let out a moan. I saw her grab Ben by the ankles and slowly drag him into the bedroom. I heard his screams and then the sound of bones breaking. I know that your nightmare probably ended that day, but mine only began. Since then, I hear her at night. I hear her whispers, and they're accompanied by the smell of rotting meat. I was probably the only person who didn't think he was crazy. I was there with him. I saw all those things, and I heard that awful moan. In 5 minutes, it'll be 11 p.m. I'm going to that apartment. I can't take it anymore. I have to end this. It dawned on me that I was most likely seeing Jerry for the last time. I watched as he slowly got up from the table and left the apartment. My phone reads 1703. The stairwells leading up through each floor in the apartment block have a kind of middle floor between each actual level of the building. This lets the stairs go up one way, and up the other way, keeping the stairs as a spiral. I'm sitting there, jammed between the second and the third floor. My boyfriend Aiden went upstairs to go do some chores for his dad. He doesn't mention me because he doesn't want his dad to know he's hanging out with me. So I hide downstairs just far enough so his dad can't see me if he exits the room on the 4th floor. I'm sitting, alone, waiting. There's no sound or buzzing from the lights, but they slightly flicker. One shade of light brighter, and one shade darker. You can't notice it unless you're staying still and spacing out, staring at the red carpet that covers the stairs. I put in headphones and turn on some random song I've heard a million times over to drown out the silence. I hate being alone, but I'm alone waiting for somebody who makes every moment feel perfect, so I don't mind it. I'm not upset, I just hate waiting. I hate being alone, and I'm waiting alone at the stairs. The melody courses through my ears, giving me some instant relaxation. I look at a picture of me and Aiden together, hugging each other, and smile at the memory. Maybe we'll take more pictures today, and I can smile at more memories when I'm home, happy of a day together. I turn the phone off and on because I'm lazy, and I want to see the time in bigger numbers staring at me through my lock screen. 17:33. I take my backpack off of my back and put it beside me. I don't know how much longer I'll have to wait, but the time's passing too slow, so I want to eat something and close my eyes. Dozing off isn't my plan, but after a ham sandwich and some water, my body has other plans, and I black out with my back to the wall of the stairs. I guess I was more tired than I thought from all the walking today. I fall into a deep, dark, dreamless slumber. Up here. I wake up. I heard somebody whispering something. A habit I do because a bad memory leads me to check if I'm awake. I push my thumb and my index finger far apart on my left hand and bite the space in between. It hurts, so I'm awake. The motion sensor turned off the light, but as soon as I move, the light flashes back on and blinds me for a second until I blink my eyes. Nothing has changed. I'm still here alone, except for the voice I heard. Was it in my head? I must have only dozed off for a few minutes. I turn on my phone, squinting my eyes at the brightness of the light. 22:51. It has in fact not only been a few minutes. I check the time 5 or 6 times over to make sure I saw it right. I did. I can't help but notice that my phone battery hasn't gone down too much. I have no service here, so I'm not surprised I didn't get any missed calls from my mom being worried, but I am still surprised I'm still here. She probably would have called one of my friends who knew Aiden and gotten them to ask him to check up on me. I get up off my butt, avoiding the feeling of pins and needles all over my legs, and make my way upstairs to head over to Aiden's door. I'm not planning to enter, but if I go up I get a service, and if I go close enough, I can get his family's Wi-Fi and use it to call my mom to come get me. As I go up one floor to what should be the third, I notice that my phone hasn't gotten any more reception. I'm still on one bar, so I can't see any calls I might have gotten. Weird. I mumble to nobody in particular. I head up to where the 4th floor should be, but it's not there. It's just another floor that leads to another floor. Something in my stomach sinks, and I check my phone desperately to hope there's at least a signal here. There isn't. Maybe I mixed up which floor I was on. There's no numbers anywhere, so if I was between the 1st and 2nd floor, then the next floor would be the 4th floor. I lean over the stairs to the gap between each staircase and floor and look up to see if the ceiling is close or far away, indicating which floor I should be on. What I see makes my heart drop. There is no ceiling. There is no end. There is no 4th floor. There is no top. I look down and see there's no ground either. No bottom floor. I run up the stairs till my heart's beating out of my chest. I scream, "Aiden!" till I feel like I'm choking on his name. It's just me. I'm alone. I'm alone on the stairwell by myself, and there is nobody here to save me. I stop. I don't know what floor I'm in, but I decide that running up the stairs screaming frantically isn't working, so I sit down and examine my options. My bag is about 20 floors down, so I should probably go get that so I have my remaining food to keep me alive a little longer. There's still the apartments themselves that I can check. There's the elevator, and then there's my phone. When I turn it on, I notice the time. 23:55. I press the phone symbol on the bottom left and dial 911. No signal. I unlock my phone and stare at the wallpaper for a moment, admiring the photo of Aiden smiling. I wish I kissed him one more time before he went upstairs. I swipe down and hold on the Wi-Fi button to check if there's any Wi-Fi connection. There's nothing. My battery is at 34% and going down, so I should preserve battery as much as I can. I try calling the elevator, but the button doesn't work. I kick the elevator door in anger and move on to the door leading into the apartments on the floor. The way the block is built, each floor has a door on the left that leads into one apartment on the left and one apartment on the right. Other blocks have 2 doors on the right and 2 doors on the left, but this one for whatever reason. The door leading into the apartments open, but neither of the apartments themselves open up. I knock and shout for help as much as my throat lets me, but I'm greeted back with silence. Nobody heeds my call for help. It's just silent oblivion reminding me that I am alone. I am alone. I turn my back to the door and I roll down against it. I break. I cry. I'm sad. I'm scared. I'm angry. I'm confused and I don't know what's happened. I cry and cry till my body gives up and I feel myself dozing off. I blink and wipe my tears and check my phone. 24:02. Of course, my phone's on 28%. I cry more. I stand and punch the door as hard as I can. The wood doesn't break, but my skin does. My middle finger's knuckle is red and bleeding. My ring finger's knuckle is red and swollen. The others look only a slight bit red. I lean against the door and cry a little more while staring at my bleeding knuckles. I sit there for a long time, until finally something changes. The motion sensor light goes off. I stand up and I go through the door into the stairwell. I've walked in and I've opened a door the motion sensor should have turned back on, but it didn't. I stand there in darkness, covered in snot and tears as my knuckles bleed small red drips onto the matching carpet, becoming one with the floor. My stomach rumbles. I'm starving. There's food in my bag. It's still down there. It's still around 20 floors down. I turn the flash on my phone on and make my way down the steps. I'm not running, so it takes a lot longer to get down than how it took to get up. I have no clear indicator as to if I'm on the same floor, so I'm hoping I'll just find my backpack and maybe try going down instead of up. When I'm 5 floors down, I suddenly hear something that makes me stop. Up here. In the same voice that woke me up when I dozed off. Maybe it's the thing that took me. Hello? I shout while looking up. Nobody responds. I peer my head over the railing and look up and see nothing. I use my phone and flash upwards. As soon as I do, I notice a pair of oily, long black fingers pull away from the bar of the stairwell. It's only 1 floor above me. I pull away and quietly walk down the stairs as fast as I can without making a noise. I am scared, but I made too much noise and it pulled away so it knows where I am. I need to get away without it knowing where I am, and I need to get to my backpack, and then I can hide behind one of the doors till the lights turn back on, if they will ever turn back on. I'm 15 floors lower than I was 5 minutes ago. I should be close to my bag. As I turn the corner again to head down the steps, I see my bag. I see my bag, and I see the figure looking through it. Long, inky, veiny limbs, on all fours holding up a thin, wiry frame. Its entire head is jammed into my bag, and it seems to be eating the contents of everything. My clothes, my water bottle, my food. As I shine my light over it and freeze in horror, it reacts to the light, pulling away into darkness and taking its head out. It doesn't have a face, it's just a spiral of teeth. Staring into its face, I don't see an end to the teeth. It's just spiraling indefinitely deeper than its head biology should allow. It screeches at me and runs downwards frantically on all fours, using the wall and the floor like a spider running as fast as it can. I scream and stand still. My food is gone. That thing is below me. Something else is above me. I don't know what to do. I'm hiding in the door on that very floor. I don't know what else has happened since, but the lights have turned on and off multiple times. I've seen shadows and eyes peering in at me when the lights were off, but I'm not going to move even when they're on. There's nowhere to run to. Don't call it a midlife crisis. A boat is a perfectly sound investment. And this was a real beauty. 36 feet of pure white fiberglass, hull with an interior flooring of varnished teak, and a closed-loop fuel system feeding 400 horses all at once. Whole setup running so smooth. It was like a cat purring at you. And all amenities included. For two lucky lovebirds to travel in style. Sure, there was only me at the moment. Charlotte had left a while ago. Taking the kids with her. Screw her. I'd put myself out there. Find someone else. I'd just work on my tan for a while first. Maybe drop a few pounds. Plenty of time for that. What I couldn't wait to do was to take my new baby out for a spin. I knew boats. We'd had one when I was a kid. Fine memories of family vacations. Sun beating down as I dried out on deck after my third swim of the day. Great stuff. And I got to steer the thing too sometimes. That's how I knew this was not gonna be a problem. So easy, a kid could do it. I didn't get lost exactly. I had the GPS. It told me which way was which and how to get back home. Even though it did insist there was an island right next to me. And there wasn't. And I had the radio. I could call for help. No worries. Since everything was obviously all good, I decided to enjoy myself. Nothing but open ocean meant perfect privacy, and maybe this was just what I needed. A little R&R. In any case, the boat was fully stocked. No time like the present to take advantage of it. I went below deck to get a Bollinger out of the fridge. I considered filling a bucket with ice and getting out a glass, but then I thought, who cares? Salt life, baby. Popping the cork, I took a big swig. Who says money can't buy happiness? Going back out on deck, I admired the view. Life was so good, clad in nothing but my bathing shorts. I was on a beautiful boat with cool blue water lapping against the hull, and gulping down champagne like it was nothing. Anyone out there who wouldn't want to be me right now? That's what I'd like to know. I sat down in the captain's seat, putting my feet up on the dash. I took another swig. I tapped my fingers on my leg. I got bored. This sucked. The sun was too hot. I was getting hungry too. Of course there was plenty of food on board, but I didn't feel like cooking anything. I remembered there was an all-day buffet back at the marina, and that realization tore it. Sitting up in the chair and tucking the still cool bottle between my thighs, I flipped the key in the ignition. It spectacularly failed to achieve anything. I turned the key back. I flipped it again. Same result. I swore, then glanced vaguely upwards and muttered a quick, "Sorry," while crossing myself. Old habits from Catholic school die hard, and if Sister Agnes had been here now, a busted engine would have been the least of my problems. I stood up, clasping the bottle, not knowing what to do. I was no mechanic. Were there even any tools on board? I had a sinking feeling that the only way I'd be getting my hands on a screwdriver was by mixing vodka with some orange juice. I took another drink. All the joy of it had vanished now, and the bubbles only tasted sour. Petulantly, I spun around and hurled the bottle away from me in the same motion. My eyes going wide, I watched in horror as it perfectly struck the forehead of the young woman who had just been hauling herself over the gunwale. Half in the boat and half out, she clung there with a dazed expression that slowly went cross-eyed, then grip slackening as her body went limp. She began to slide back towards the water. Instinct made me leap forward to grab hold of her. I got her just in time, and grasping her under the arms, managed to flop her onto the deck. "Jesus," I was muttering. "Jesus, Jesus." This didn't count as blasphemy, right? I was asking for help more than anything else. Her head was bleeding freely. I still carried some muscle from my football days, and I'd gotten her really good. Was she dead? Please, dear God, don't let her be dead. I put a hand to her throat to feel for a pulse, and a warm sense of pure relief flowed through me when I felt a beat. Slow, but steady. Picking her up like a child, I began carrying her below deck. No way I could leave her out there in the baking sun, so the bed would be the best place for her. It did occur to me that she was completely naked, dripping wet and naked. Where the hell had she come from? Was there another boat? I put her gently down and draped a sheet over her for the sake of modesty. Then I hurried back and scanned the horizon in every direction. Nothing. I wished I'd brought a pair of binoculars, but probably it wouldn't have made any difference. Laser eye surgery had left me with 20/20 vision, and everywhere I looked there was nothing but the sea. I shook my head. This was too much. First my boat had broken down, and now a skinny dipper appeared out of nowhere to bleed all over my Egyptian cotton. I had to get on the radio and call for help. The only smart thing I'd done before heading out was to familiarize myself with the handheld VHF. The thing had a built-in GPS that would automatically transmit my position, and it didn't take me long to get in contact with a rescue vessel. It was a stroke of pure luck, but they were returning from what had proved to be a false alarm, and had no problem redirecting themselves to pick us up. When I explained about the presence of an unconscious woman with a head wound, it really seemed to light a fire under their butts, too. When I turned around, the unconscious woman in question was sitting up in the bed. I froze, looking at her. She looked back. Her eyes were shockingly dark, as if the pupils had fully dilated. She fixed me with a gaze of such intensity I wanted to look away, yet I didn't dare to break eye contact for a second. You see, the sheet had slipped down around her waist, and her small breasts were on full display. It shouldn't have mattered. I'd seen all there was to see out there on the deck, and touched her too, when I carried her down here. But somehow the sheen of the purple bedcloths around her were emphasizing her nakedness, turning it from a natural state and into something lecherous. I wished I'd gotten the plain white sheets now. I realized. Who did I even think I was? "Are you all right?" I finally managed. She touched her forehead, licked blood from her fingers. "My head hurts," she said slowly. Her accent was unfamiliar to me. Russian, I thought. Eastern Europe somewhere. Long way from home, if so. "Yeah," I said. "I'm really sorry about that. I didn't see you." I chuckled nervously. "I mean, where did you even come from?" She sniffed, looking around at the interior of the cabin without seeming much impressed. "I swam, because boats always..." She was making no sense, trailing off in the middle of her sentence. The blow to the head must have done a number on her. I silently prayed there would be no brain damage, and offered to attend church every Sunday for a full year as payment for it. "You should let me look at that cut there," I said. "I'll clean it up." I was already scrambling for the first aid kit. Something had cracked when I hit her. But was it her head or was it the bottle? I knew more or less what I was doing when it came to the basics, but I was worried this would be beyond me. Didn't matter. I'd do what I could, and the rest would just have to wait. Sitting down on the bed, I put the little red and white satchel next to me and began setting out some gauze and a small bottle of saline solution. "This might..." I began. I was going to say sting a little, when her hand snaked out to grab my wrist. I instinctively tried to pull away and found I couldn't. God, but she was strong. She leaned into me. I saw her nostrils flare. Was she smelling me? Hey, I said. I was stammering a bit. Gently, I tried to extricate myself, but it was no use. Instead, I found myself being pulled forward. I noticed for the first time that her teeth were surprisingly bad, snaggly and yellowish. Cute otherwise, but not as young as I'd thought at first. Late 20s perhaps, just very skinny. And acting weird. Concussion, I decided. Had to be. What was the procedure with that? Keep them awake? Play along? Like my cologne? I asked. You smell nice too. Driftwood and kelp. The bold new scent by Saint Laurent. I realized I was babbling. My wrist was starting to hurt. She seemed intent on planting a kiss on my shoulder, despite my attempts at dissuading her. She'd almost put her mouth to the trembling flesh when she winced, her hand releasing me to gingerly prod at her forehead again. She looked at me. You would mend me? I'd pulled myself back a little as soon as she let go. I was entirely in two minds about things. Part of me thought the cabin seemed suddenly very cramped. It wanted to place itself out of reach of those slender arms with their vice-like grip. Another part only wanted to help her. It was so clear she needed me. What kind of guy would I be if I just ignored that? This was kinda my fault. Sure, I said. I'll take care of it. Just stay still now. Don't grab. Slowly, I dabbed away most of the blood and cleaned the wound out as best I could. It wasn't all that bad, I thought. If I didn't know any better, I'd say it had almost begun to heal already. Head wounds were supposed to bleed a lot too, weren't they? Maybe I'd gotten worked up over nothing. Though she had passed out for a moment, and that probably wasn't good. Carefully, I slightly increased the pressure on her brow, just to feel for any sign of something being broken. No, everything still felt fine. It was just the first momentary panic that had made me think otherwise. Alright, there was some aloe gel in the kit. That was good for wounds, right? Couldn't hurt. I squeezed a small dollop onto my fingers and very gently began to massage it into her forehead. She had closed her eyes halfway through my ministrations, and now she was sighing contently. Her mouth curved slightly. That's nice, she said. I like that. Good, great. I'm gonna put a bandage on you now, okay? Before I could get that far, the handheld crackled into life. Cherry Bomb, come in. Cherry Bomb, this is Sunbeam. We are approaching your location now. Please respond. Over. Yeah, I named my boat Cherry Bomb. So what? Sue me for liking the Runaways. You stay here, okay? I told my guest. Rest. I'm going up on deck, but I'll be right back. I grabbed the handheld and hurried out. Out on the deck, the ocean breeze did wonders for clearing my head. I hadn't realized just how on edge I was. Shading my eyes against the sun, I could see the shape of a boat out there now, rapidly approaching. Sunbeam, this is Cherry Bomb. We are, standing by for rescue. Over. Roger that, Cherry Bomb. We are prepared to offer immediate medical assistance. Is the patient capable of being moved? Over. Actually, I said, I don't think we'll need... There were footsteps behind me. I turned to look and let go of the call button. I feel better now, she said. She stood there, naked and completely unashamed. I remember why I came here. She moved towards me slowly, Her lips were parted slightly, and I thought her tongue darted quickly out to lick them. Then her eyes shifted to a point above my shoulder. "Boat," she said. "Coming to get you?" "Yeah," I said. "Us. It's all gonna be okay now." I had taken a step backwards, I realized, the way she'd been looking at me. She seemed to be considering something. "Made me feel good," she murmured, "when you touched me." She'd come so close we could have almost kissed. Gently, she placed her hands on my chest. "But," she said, "I'm also hungry." She gave me a shove so hard and fast I didn't even have time to yell before going over the side. The water slapped my back like a giant's hand and I went under, then came back up, shuddering. From the deck, she looked at me. "I like you," she shouted. "I will give you a head start, okay? If you make it to the other boat, you can leave." I was about to ask her what she was playing at, but she had already leapt from the deck, curving forward to perform a perfect dive. She knifed into the water and changed. Her speed had carried her deep beneath the surface, but I could still see her well enough to know it wasn't her anymore. Scales glittered on a blue-gray and sinuous body that snaked around and coiled upon itself. A woman's torso grew from the lower body of a giant eel. A pair of eyes like dark marbles blinked as a nightmare mouth split open. Screaming, I thrashed and flailed. Made for the ladder of my boat. I had to get out of the water. The shape came shooting up so quickly it almost seemed to simply appear before me. It cut me off, pushed me back, hurting me away. A webbed hand slid across my belly in passing, grating like sandpaper against my skin. A message delivered. Don't go that way. I reversed, kicking, threw myself around, and turning my momentum into a desperate and inelegant crawl as I began to swim for my life in the direction of the approaching rescue vessel. This wasn't happening. This wasn't possible. She wasn't. A stab of pain in my left thigh. Something flashed past me in the water, circled round, and came up again from behind me. I whimpered, swallowed seawater, floundered, threw myself forward again. It was below me now. I could feel it. Caught flashes of reflected light. At first I'd been praying, begging, please, please, please don't let it get me. God and Sister Agnes, help me now, and I will always be so good forever, I promise. But even that babble of childish fear and pleading had stilled, displaced by a deeper terror, some atavistic instinct that screamed at me shark, shark, and beneath that, even purer and more thoroughly imprinted in the memory of my DNA, was simply the image of teeth. I wasn't a man, I was prey. Like prey, I fled. A touch of ice against my foot, a red line drawn across my chest, a nip, a prod, a cut, and something vital leaking out of me. Then nothing. I crashed on through the waves, heedless of anything but the need to escape. A wall loomed in front of me. Trapped, trapped, gibbering with panic. I tried to turn, but strong arms were already gripping me, hauling me up out of the water. I became aware of frantic voices surrounding me on all sides. "Got you, buddy. Hang on." "What was that?" "Jesus, you're torn up." "Why did you jump? We were coming right to you." "The girl. Where's the girl? Anyone see the girl?" I couldn't give them answers. Already I was slipping into unconsciousness. As it was, the paramedic they had standing by on the sunbeam came in pretty handy after all. I was missing 3 toes on my left foot, and bleeding from a dozen other wounds. The cut across my chest had sliced away a nipple, and otherwise left a long and ugly scar that swelled up purple and never really flattened out. They looked for her as long as they could, but of course there was no sign of anyone else. Shark must have gotten her. Weren't supposed to be any man-eaters around here, but sometimes they travel and end up in unexpected places. So I was assured, anyway. Of course there were other questions. Who was she? What had happened between us on my boat? I could have gotten in some pretty bad trouble over that, but it all worked out in the end. After all, the crew of the Sunbeam had been watching through binoculars, had caught me going into the water, then they'd seen the girl jump in after me, all of her own free will. After that, things did get somewhat confused, but I knew to keep my mouth shut about it until I had several very expensive lawyers by my side. Money, money, money. What can't it do? Well, it can't get rid of the nightmares. I drink myself to sleep now, most nights. It's not the pain of my missing pieces or the jumbled images from my panicked swim that got through my head, but something else that happened afterwards. When we'd given up the search, everyone else were busy. One man working to stitch up my leg, but I was awake and looking back, sitting propped up against an equipment chest. I saw her, out in the sea. She was bobbing very peacefully, only the humanish part of her torso visible above water. Our eyes met, flashing me a needle grin. She cheerfully waved a webbed hand in goodbye. Then she dove and disappeared beneath the surface. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I'd get spooked by a good horror movie or jump at an unexpected noise in the dark, but I always chalked it up to an overactive imagination. That changed last summer when I took a job that led me to the old Hartley house at the end of Willow Street. Now I'm not sure what I believe anymore, but I know one thing for certain. Evil exists, and sometimes it finds a home in the most unexpected places. It started innocently enough. I'm a 23-year-old architecture student, and I was thrilled to land a summer internship with a local historical preservation society. My first major assignment was to survey and document the Hartley House, a decrepit Victorian mansion that had stood abandoned for decades. The plan was to assess its condition and determine if restoration was feasible. The house had a reputation, of course. Every small town has that one creepy old building that's the subject of endless rumors and dares. Kids would dare each other to spend the night there, but no one ever did. Not really. There were whispers about the Hartley family, how they'd all died mysteriously over a century ago, how the house had stood empty ever since. But I didn't put much stock in ghost stories and urban legends. My first visit to the house was on a sweltering July afternoon. The taxi dropped me off at the end of the overgrown driveway, and I remember thinking the place looked like something out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of weathered brick and warped wood, with a tower on one side and a wraparound porch thick with vines. Most of the windows were boarded up, but I could see hints of stained glass behind the boards on the upper floors. As I approached the front door, key in hand, I felt a strange reluctance. It was like walking through molasses, each step harder than the last. I chalked it up to nerves and the oppressive heat. When I finally reached the porch, the wood creaked ominously under my feet. The key stuck in the lock at first, but with a bit of jiggling, it turned. The door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo through the entire house. The smell hit me first, musty and thick, with an underlying sweetness that reminded me of overripe fruit. I stepped inside, my shoes leaving prints in the thick layer of dust on the floor. The entry hall was grand, even in its state of decay. The sweeping staircase dominated the space, its once elegant banister now warped and splintered. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls in long strips, revealing glimpses of bare plaster beneath. To my left and right, open doorways led to what I assumed were the parlor and dining room. I spent that first day taking measurements and photos, scribbling notes about structural integrity and potential restoration challenges. It was tedious work, but I found myself oddly fascinated by the house. Every room seemed to hold whispers of its former glory. Ornate moldings, fragments of expensive wallpaper, the occasional glint of tarnished brass. It wasn't until I reached the second floor that things started to feel off. I was in what appeared to be a child's bedroom, documenting the remains of a once cheerful nursery. Faded circus animals still danced across one wall. Their painted eyes seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. I was crouched down, examining the base of an old rocking horse when I heard it, the clear, unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding. The sound had come from somewhere above me, muffled but distinct. I held my breath, straining to hear more, but the house had fallen silent once again. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small in the empty room. No response. I told myself it must have come from outside, maybe some kids playing in a neighboring yard, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The sound had been too close, too clear. I finished my work in that room quickly, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. As I stepped back into the hallway, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There, in the thick dust coating the floorboards, was a set of small footprints. They led from the room I'd just left to the base of the attic stairs at the end of the hall. Child-size footprints. Fresh ones. I stared at them for a long moment, my mind racing to find a logical explanation. Had some neighborhood kid snuck in while I was working? But I would have heard the front door open, and besides, these prints seemed to appear out of nowhere. There was no dust disturbed leading up to them. Against my better judgment, I followed the prints to the attic upstairs. They went up a few steps before disappearing. The attic wasn't on my survey list for the day, but I knew I wouldn't be able to rest if I didn't check it out. The stairs creaked with each step, the sound impossibly loud in the silent house. At the top was a heavy wooden door, warped with age. It took some effort, but I managed to push it open. The attic was a cavernous space, the sloped ceiling creating deep shadows in the corners. Dust motes danced in the few rays of sunlight that managed to pierce the grime-covered windows. The air was thick and stifling, carrying that same sickly sweet odor I'd noticed downstairs, but stronger here. I swept my flashlight across the room, taking in piles of forgotten furniture and stacks of mildewed boxes. Nothing seemed out of place or recently disturbed. I was about to turn back when my light caught something that made my heart skip a beat. In the far corner of the attic, partially hidden behind an old wardrobe, was a rocking chair, and it was moving, slowly, steadily, as if someone had just vacated it. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to look away from the gently swaying chair. The creaking of its runners seemed to grow louder, drowning out the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the movement stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I don't know how long I stood there, flashlight trained on that corner, before I finally managed to back out of the attic. I practically flew down the stairs, my earlier skepticism completely forgotten in the face of blind panic. I didn't stop running until I was out of the house and halfway down the overgrown driveway. Only then did I pause to catch my breath, hands on my knees as I gulped in the warm summer air. When I finally looked back at the house, I saw something that nearly stopped my heart. There, in a second-floor window, was a face. A child's face, pale and solemn, staring down at me. Our eyes met for the briefest moment before the figure melted away into the shadows. I'd like to say that was the end of it, that I quit the internship, told the Historical Society to demolish the place, and never looked back. But that's not what happened. Because the thing is, I went back, again and again over the next few weeks. Each time something inexplicable would happen. Objects moving on their own, doors slamming shut, the sound of footsteps when I knew I was alone. But instead of driving me away, these occurrences only fueled my obsession with the house and its secrets. I threw myself into researching the Hartley family history, spending countless hours in the local library poring over old newspapers and town records. What I found chilled me to the bone. The Hartleys weren't just any wealthy family. They were involved in something dark, something that the papers of the time only hinted at in vague terms. There were rumors of occult practices, of children going missing in nearby towns, and at the center of it all was Edgar Hartley, the family patriarch. From what I could piece together, Edgar had been obsessed with the idea of immortality. He'd traveled the world, studying ancient texts and obscure rituals. When he returned to Willow Street, he was a changed man. That's when the disappearances started. The official story was that the entire Hartley family, Edgar, his wife, and their 3 children, died of influenza in the winter of 1891. But I found whispers of a different tale, of screams heard coming from the house on a moonless night, of lights in the attic windows and chanting in an unknown language. The more I uncovered, the more I felt drawn to the house. It was like it was calling to me, revealing its secrets one by one. I started spending more time there, long after my official work hours were over. I'd sit in the rooms for hours, waiting, watching, listening. And then one night, everything changed. I was in the attic again, drawn there by the persistent feeling that I was on the verge of understanding something crucial. The rocking chair was still, but I could feel a presence in the room watching me. "I know you're here," I said aloud, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I want to understand what happened in this house." For a long moment there was only silence. Then a whisper, so faint I thought I might have imagined it. "He's still here." A chill ran down my spine. Who? Edgar? The temperature in the room plummeted. I could see my breath misting in front of me. The whisper came again, louder this time, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "He never left. He's waiting. He's always waiting." Suddenly the room exploded into chaos. Every object not nailed down began to levitate. Chairs, boxes, old picture frames. They swirled around in a vortex of dust and debris. Through the maelstrom, I saw figures taking shape. Translucent, ghostly forms of children, their faces contorted in terror, and behind them, a larger shape was coalescing, a tall, gaunt figure in an old-fashioned suit. As I watched in horror, its features became clearer, sunken eyes, a wide, leering grin, and hands that ended in long, claw-like fingers. Edgar Hartley. His voice when he spoke was like gravel grinding against my skull. "Welcome, my dear. We've been waiting so long for someone like you. Someone to continue my work." I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The ghostly children swirled around me, their whispers growing urgent. "Run. You must run." Edgar's form glided closer, those terrible hands reaching for me. "You've come so far, learned so much. Join us. Join me. We have such wonders to show you." In that moment, I understood the truth. The house wasn't just haunted. It was a trap. A prison for the souls Edgar had taken, and a lure for new victims. And I had walked right into it. With every ounce of will I possessed, I broke free of the paralysis that gripped me. I ran, Edgar's enraged howl following me as I fled down the attic stairs. The entire house seemed to come alive around me, doors slamming, floorboards buckling, the very walls pulsing like a living thing. I didn't stop running until I was far down Willow Street, the sound of my own panicked breathing drowning out everything else. When I finally dared to look back, I saw the house standing silent and dark once more, but in an upper window, I could just make out a figure, tall and thin, watching me retreat. I quit the internship the next day, told them I was sick, that I couldn't complete the project. I tried to warn them about the house, but who would believe such a fantastical story? As far as I know, the Hartley house still stands at the end of Willow Street, waiting for its next victim. I'm writing this now as a warning. If you ever find yourself in a small town with a house that everyone avoids, a house with a dark history and a bad reputation, stay away. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some secrets are meant to stay buried. Because sometimes, the monsters we tell ourselves don't exist are all too real. And sometimes they're just waiting for someone curious enough, or foolish enough, to invite them back into the world. I thought I didn't believe in ghosts. Now I know better. There are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows of old houses and forgotten histories. And once you've seen them, once you know they're real, you can never truly escape. So if you're ever driving down Willow Street and you see an old Victorian house at the end, keep driving. Don't slow down. Don't look back. Because Edgar Hartley is still there. And he's always waiting for someone new to join his family. I had a weird experience at the movies yesterday, and wanted to share it on the internet as a bit of a PSA. Essentially, you really should read the warnings that come on before the movie. I go to my local theater pretty often. It's close to my house, and I like the popcorn. Naturally, when I was bored with nothing to do yesterday, I walked over there. There was only one movie showing that I hadn't already seen. I hadn't heard of it before, but I wasn't in the mood to rewatch a movie. I bought a ticket, got a popcorn, and sat down in the theater. I really wish I remembered what the movie was called, but I'm horrible with names. I kind of recall what it was about. Some cheesy rom-com about young adults falling in love in college biology class. I was wondering if the theater was doing some kind of nostalgia event because the thing felt like it came out 25 years ago. If they were, it wasn't well attended. Only a handful of people were in the theater with me. The above-mentioned warning came on after the standard, "Be quiet and don't record the movie" clip. It was just a black screen with white text that went something like this. Notice: leaving the theater while the film is playing is against theater policy. Violators will be escorted out of the building. A voice read the text out as well, and I guess the addition of the warning had been rushed because she tripped over her words when she read "leaving." I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured some teens had been goofing off in the theater hallway or something. Around an hour into the film, I really had to pee. I remembered the warning but thought if I wasn't being disruptive, I wouldn't get in trouble. I mean, they wouldn't ban going to the bathroom, would they? So I left, taking note of which theater I was in. Theater 3. I went to the bathroom and walked back. The theater wasn't there. Like I said, I go to the movies a lot, so I know the building layout well. Where Theater 3 was supposed to be was instead Theater C. I had never seen a Theater C in this building before. Only Theaters 1 through 4. I wondered if maybe they'd changed it without my noticing, and tried the door to Theater C, but it was locked. I walked around for a bit looking for Theater 3, and I quickly noticed more things that were out of place. For starters, there was no trash. Nothing in the trash cans. No popcorn spilled on the floor. The place was pristine. It was cold, too. Real cold. Outside, it was like 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and I knew the theater AC hadn't been this intense when I came in. The most damning thing, though, was the lack of an exit. No ticket or popcorn stand either. Just a couple hallways with doors to various impossible theaters. I was starting to panic and tried all the doors. None of them opened. How are they going to escort me out if there's no exit? I thought hysterically, and chuckled a little. It came out louder than I expected and echoed through the hall. Immediately I heard footsteps behind me. I tried to turn around, but before I could, a frigid hand wrapped its fingers around my shoulder and pulled me back. I jerked away and spun to see what was there. It was a man, I think. Definitely a person. I didn't see any specific features. His outstretched hand distracted me. His fingers were blackened and swollen, horribly frostbitten. He lurched forward, grasping for my shoulder again, and I jumped back, turned, and ran like my life depended on it. Half stumbling through the hall, I could hear footsteps behind me. The temperature kept dropping. Freezing air bit my lungs when I gasped for air. I wasn't sure how long I could keep running for. Right as I was about to collapse, an arm burst from the wall beside me. It beckoned toward me, and without thinking I took it. It yanked me into the wall. We crashed through like it was paper, and behind was a door marked exit. I pushed it open, and stepped aside so my rescuer could follow. After a couple seconds passed without anyone exiting, I glanced through the door to see what was happening. There was nobody there. The credits were rolling in front of the empty seats of Theater 3. I was standing outside, having gone through an emergency exit. My legs ached, but I didn't know what to do, so I just walked back home. I don't know what exactly happened. I don't know if it was the theater or something else that did it. I don't know if it was legal. I was warned, I guess. In any case, I'm not going back to the theater. I'd advise all of you to read the warnings when, or if, you go to the movies. I got into a car accident a few weeks ago. One moment I was tapping a finger along to Boston's More Than a Feeling on my morning commute to work. The next, I was in a hospital gown in an unfamiliar white room. A doctor told me a semi had blown through a red light and T-boned me on the driver's side of my car. The end result was having my left leg amputated below the knee. I may have walked, well, begrudgingly wheeled away with my life, but the driver of the semi wasn't so lucky. He flew through the windshield of his truck and slid 20-some-odd feet down Main Street, leaving a trail of blood and organs behind him like a meat crayon. I was extremely bitter after my accident. I began picking up the bottle more often than not, and friends began distancing themselves from me, leaving me isolated in my new handy-capable apartment. Sometime last week, I woke up and noticed the whiskey glass on my nightstand was almost empty, so I hoisted myself into my wheelchair beside my bed and rolled into the kitchen to freshen it up. That's when I heard a slow clomp, clomp, clomp coming down the hallway, like somebody was playing hopscotch. I immediately spun around. "Who's there? I may be in a chair, but it won't stop me from putting a hole into you," I screamed, as I reached for the small handgun I had holstered to the right arm of my chair. Clomp, clomp, clomp. "I'm warning you, I'm not screwing around." I was sweating profusely, and my thumb almost slid off the hammer of my pistol as I tried to cock it. Clomp, clomp, clomp. I took aim at where I thought the intruder's midsection would be as I waited for him to turn the corner, and I found myself face to face with a leg. Well, most of a leg anyway. A leg that was severed just below the knee. I didn't know what to do. I just stared at the thing and it seemed to stare back at me. Then it began hopping towards me and I freaked out and I took a few shots at the thing. The first two missed, but the third caught it and sent it sailing off somewhere down the hallway. I was met with a burning white pain where my one leg once was and I passed out. I woke up sometime later to loud knocking and somebody yelling at my door. "Sir, this is the police. Is everything okay in there? We had a report of shots fired." Disoriented, I weakly rolled over to the door to answer it. My head was pounding like an elephant on a bass drum as I unlatched the lock to let the officer in. The cop looked down at me and frowned pitifully. I must have looked like a wreck. I hadn't showered in a couple days and reeked of booze. That's when I realized I spilled the remnants of my drink into my lap when I passed out, making it look like I peed myself. Yeah, someone broke in, but I scared them off, I guess. The officer raised an eyebrow and told me he would have to make a report of this. He didn't seem to want to stick around too long, something I was getting used to. My new disability combined with my disheveled appearance seemed to make a lot of people uncomfortable. I locked the door back up and began to wheel myself toward the kitchen to get back to business when I froze up. The leg was standing beside my open living room window. I saw the calf muscle tense up like a runner about to take off. "Wait," I yelled, but it was too late. The leg went flying out of the window. I sped over as fast as I could and peered out just in time to see it smack to the ground, 8 stories below. I had experienced phantom sensations before where my leg used to be, like an itch that's now impossible to scratch, but I had not yet known phantom pain. When the leg hit the ground, I felt an explosion of agony, like a hydraulic press had come down onto my skin. I felt bones that were no longer there cracking and breaking. I don't know what to do. I'm being haunted by my leg. Maybe I'm going insane, but the thing keeps messing with me. Last night I woke up to a sharp pain, and found the foot merrily hopping around in thumbtacks. I don't know why this is happening, but I'm starting to think that maybe it can't pass on without the rest of me. Some nights I wake up and see it in my wheelchair flicking at my gun with its big toe. It wants me to join it, and at this point, I'm really starting to see that as an option. Have any of you heard something like this? This thing is wearing me out, and I'm at a loss for what to do, so please drop me a line. Any advice at all? Thanks. James slid his fingers down my waist and tucked them into my back pocket, bending over to kiss me on the cheek. We stood like that in our freshly manicured front lawn, watching the movers carry our furniture up the front steps and into our new home. In our old apartment, on the outskirts of the city, that furniture had felt large and compact like a can of sardines. It was difficult to even maneuver to the fridge and back. Here, in the suburbs, where every house was a cream-colored cookie-cutter copy of each other, it would feel like dollhouse decor. I took James by the waist, removing his hand from my backside and giving him a coy smile. Our honeymoon phase hadn't really ever ended, not since we started dating, and definitely not since our wedding. I didn't think it ever would. Is this too much? I asked, resting my head on his shoulder. It'll feel so empty with just the two of us. For now, he muttered, and I could feel him smiling. We had never even really discussed starting a family, just because it felt so implied. We could always just read each other's minds like that. I knew he wanted kids as soon as possible, but I also knew he knew I wanted to wait a little longer, and he respected that. It was inevitable, but not a priority. I looked around. I always found neighborhoods like this one a little creepy. They felt simulated and devoid of actual life, but not this one. Somehow, even though the houses were the same, they each felt different. The home to our left appeared empty, with a colorful for sale sign on the lawn, but the one to our right was lively. The windows were adorned with bright pink flowers overflowing from their pots, and the yard was sprinkled with children's toys. Even now there were kids outside, a young boy who appeared around 12 years of age pushing a younger girl on a yellow swing set. Their laughter filled the air. "Hello," a cheerful voice called, and I turned to see a woman marching towards us with a gleaming smile on her face. She was beautiful and young, maybe around my age, with blonde hair tied up in a pristine ponytail. Her pants fit her perfectly, accentuating her feminine curves, and her blouse was bunched up around her pregnant stomach. Felt myself subconsciously cross my arms. Insecure. "Hello," my husband replied, bringing me out of my daze. I realized the woman was holding a dish wrapped in tinfoil and steaming. "You're the new neighbors, I presume?" she asked, her smile only brightening, revealing her perfectly white teeth. "Yes," I said, not wanting her to think I was rude. "I'm Adeline. This is James. We're so excited. This is such a lovely neighborhood." "As are we. My husband and I were so pleased to hear a young couple was moving in. It really is the perfect place to raise a family," she said knowingly, glancing at her children and then back at us. "Oh, we don't have kids," I said, a nervous laugh bubbling up in my throat. "Oh," she exclaimed. Her smile seemed to falter, but almost as if it were a glitch. It was so brief. She held out the dish in her hands. "Tuna casserole?" James took it from her, peeling back some of the foil and taking a whiff. Smells delicious. We never caught your name, I said, leaning into my husband's side. You are... The woman opened her mouth, but no words came out. I waited for her to answer. Honey? A gruff voice called from the neighbor's doorway. It seemed almost unnaturally loud. Not as if he was yelling, but like his voice was amplified somehow. The woman smiled at us again apologetically. I must be going, she said, resting her hands on her stomach. We'll have to get together sometime. James and I only had the time to nod before she was turning away, walking quickly back towards who I assumed must be her husband. I saw something move on the second floor of their house, baby blue curtains parting. I looked up and met the eyes of two more children. They appeared to be twin girls, maybe 4 or 5. One of them waved, the other just stared. The night felt even more quiet when I stepped outside, almost eerily so. The air felt so heavy and still, like I was standing inside of a painting of a street. My footsteps echoed against the pavement, and I tensed each time another scream rang out from the house. What the? I muttered, half out of curiosity, and half just to hear a human voice. I knocked on the front door 3 times, wiping my sweaty palms on my jeans. I was already starting to regret coming over here, feeling silly for disturbing their night if it really was nothing. Even their porch was pristine. The white paint looked fresh, and even the dolls and toy cars strewn against the railing looked organized. I heard footsteps, and the front door opened a crack. I caught a glimpse of a man's face, his jaw square and dusted with stubble. Good evening, Adeline, he greeted me. Hi, I said, my voice coming out far softer than I meant for it to. Good evening. I thought I heard something. Is everything okay? He hesitated, then smiled. It looked a little forced. He opened the door wider, and I had to stop myself from flinching. His white button-down was stained with flecks of blood, bright red and fresh. There was a child clinging to his pant leg, a little boy that I didn't recognize. Everything is all right, he told me, tussling the boy's hair absent-mindedly. My wife is just going into labor. Oh, I exclaimed, blinking at him in shock. He seemed incredibly calm, considering the circumstances. Should we call someone? An ambulance? No, he said quickly, his smile fading the tiniest bit. No, that's quite all right. Thank you for your concern. This isn't her first rodeo, so to speak. He chuckled stiffly. Oh, okay. Well, tell her congratulations. Will do. He seemed to look me up and down, and a shiver creeped up my spine. Well, have a lovely night, and we're so happy you moved in. He went to close the door on me, turning away, but at the last second, the little boy shoved his hand through the crack. A piece of notebook paper fluttered to the slats of the porch, and the door closed with a sharp click. I picked up the piece of paper, somewhat stunned, as another scream ricocheted inside my head. I unfolded it slowly, holding it under the porch light and squinting to make out what the shaky scratches of red crayon read. Mommy makes lots of babies. Smiley face. It was only a week later that I got a call on the house phone. I was in the bath and I ran to the kitchen, a towel wrapped around my waist and my hair dripping warm water down my back. Hello, I said into the receiver, clutching the phone with both hands. Somehow I already knew who it would be. "Hello, Adeline." Her voice was just as cheerful as it had been that first day we'd moved in, like a jingling bell hanging from the door of a shop. "How are you, dear?" "I'm fine," I replied, my eyebrows cinching into an involuntary frown. "How are you? How's the baby?" "What?" She sounded genuinely confused, but only for a second. "Oh, the baby's just fine. Such a miracle of life, isn't it?" "Yes, such a miracle. That's amazing. I'm so happy for you." "Yes, so, listen. I was hoping you and your husband would come by tonight for a little dinner party. I made tuna casserole. Please, please say you will." I swallowed. Something about her was beginning to unnerve me. Something about how perky she was only days after labor. But I still didn't want to be rude. And it wasn't like I didn't like her. I didn't want to pass up any friends, especially when they lived just next door. "Of course," I said, hoping she could hear my polite smile. "We'll be there." I clutched my Tupperware of cookies tightly to my chest as James guided me up the front steps. I prayed they wouldn't be able to tell they were store-bought, although I was sure they wouldn't say anything even if they did. James knocked on the door, then tutted and picked at some chipped white paint next to the peephole. "Looks like they need a new paint job out here. Maybe I should offer." "Babe, that's rude," I told him, a strange feeling twisting in my stomach. Something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Our neighbor threw open the door, beaming at us. She was wearing a pink flowery dress and a white apron. "I'm so glad you could make it. Come on in. Everyone's waiting in the dining room." I couldn't help but stare at her stomach, which seemed almost as large as it had been the day we'd met. I glanced at my husband, but he didn't seem to have noticed anything, and only smiled at me reassuringly. Admittedly, I didn't know as much as I could about childbirth, but I knew your stomach stayed large for at least a few days. Surely her body just hadn't recovered yet. Their dining room was larger than ours. Or maybe that was just the way it was decorated. It was minimal. The only personal items I could see were more toys. At their long dining table there were 6 places set. A little girl sat at one of them, quietly playing with a Barbie doll, and a teenager sat next to her, scowling at us. I didn't recognize either of them. This couple seemed so young. How could they have a teenager already? Some people started early, I guess. I had assumed dinner party meant there would be more people, but I felt guilty for assuming that. They were so eager to spend time with us. Maybe they just didn't have many other friends, especially with so many children running around. Across from the kids sat her husband, grinning at us. I blinked. He didn't look how I remembered him. Hadn't her husband been a brunette? This man's hair was a lighter brown, almost a dirty blonde, and his face seemed softer. It must have just been the lighting, I told myself. Surely in the dark, his features had just looked bleak and more severe. The woman immediately started bustling around in the kitchen, and James and I took our seats. I stared at the glass of wine already set out in front of me, the dark red liquid, reminding me suddenly of that night, of the blood splattered across the man's shirt. James began chatting up the husband, but I couldn't bring myself to keep up. I just stared into the glass, swirling the wine around, watching it lap up against the rim. It was so dark, almost black. We didn't even know these people's names. Were we so rude that we had never asked? Was that a bug? I dipped my finger into my wine and fished out a small fly, still buzzing desperately. Looking around quickly, I flicked it off my finger and to the ground, not wanting to embarrass our hosts. "Such a lovely home," James was saying, and I smiled and nodded as if I had been listening. "Yes," I butt in, and then hesitated. "Forgive me, but I've forgotten your name." The man's grin didn't falter. "Joseph," he said happily. "No need to apologize. I'm Joseph." "And your wife?" "Dinner is served," the woman called, interrupting me. She wielded a large dish which gave off a faint fishy aroma, setting it down with a flourish in the center of the table. "Thank goodness, honey. I'm starving." Joseph tucked his napkin into his shirt and picked up his fork and his knife, clutching them in both hands cartoonishly. I looked at James, searching for any semblance of confusion. I found none, only a polite smile. "This is the children's favorite dish," she told us, taking my husband's plate. "How many kids do you have?" "Here you are, love," she said, scooping a helping of casserole onto his plate and reaching over to me to set it down in front of him. As she leaned over me, I caught a glimpse of her face. Her skin seemed to glisten around her eyes, like it was wet. "Growing boys need to eat." James chuckled nervously, the first hint I'd gotten of anything amiss. "That's what I keep telling Adeline." Joseph laughed uproariously, pounding his fists on the table. I caught the teenager jump, and the little girl set down her Barbie, but I couldn't decipher the expression on either of their faces. "A man of my own heart," he cried, and he didn't stop laughing. "What did you bring us?" the woman asked after a moment, nodding at the Tupperware, having to raise her voice to be heard over her husband's laughter. I swallowed. "Chocolate chip cookies." "Lovely." I gazed down at the food she'd put in front of me. It smelled even fishier up close. Nothing like the first one she'd given us. I picked up my fork, picking at a flaky corner, a fish bone stuck into the prongs, long and slender and sharp. "I hope you'll eat it all," the woman said to me, leaning over so close her blonde curls tumbled onto my shoulder. She smelled of perfume and faintly of fish. Now that she was close to me, I could see clearly that her face was, in fact, wet. "You simply must get used to eating for two." After that dinner, it wasn't that I was avoiding them, but I didn't make much of an effort to get closer. I felt deeply uncomfortable, in a way that I didn't quite like to think about. Even so, I told myself it wasn't them. We just had gotten busy. James had started his new job in the city, starting construction on a new shopping mall, and I had a big interview coming up. I simply didn't have much time to think about our neighbors. Not that they didn't make it difficult not to. Neither of us got much sleep anymore. The sound of a crying baby kept us up and made us restless. They baffled me during the day, too. One Monday, before James had gotten home, I noticed a man out in their yard, playing with a few of the children. He was chasing them around the swings, around and around, and they were shrieking with glee. My curiosity got the better of me. Was this an uncle, a babysitter? I knew little to nothing about this family, and I figured that was what was unnerving me so much. Maybe if I knew more, I would feel comfortable living next to them. Before I could stop myself, I walked out, watching them play for another moment before speaking. "Hi," I called out, and all four of them turned to face me. "Hello, I'm Adeline. I live next door. Sorry to be nosy, I was just wondering." How are you related to the family? The man smiled at me just like the rest of them. Widely. Up close he looked even older, maybe in his 40s. He must be a relative of some sort. Don't be sorry, Adeline. I'm their son. We've been so happy that you moved in. After that, I put even more distance between myself and the neighbors. I was sure there was a logical explanation for all of this, but if I thought too hard about it, I felt like my brain would explode. A couple of nights later, James had had enough. That's it, he muttered against my shoulder, squeezing me from behind. I'm going over there. I groaned, rolling over and pressing our noses together. Even with my eyes closed, I could see his dark circles, and his hair stuck up wildly from tossing and turning. Don't, honey, I whispered, my voice raspy. It's okay. It's not their fault. Surely they can do something, he argued, gently running his fingers through my hair despite his abrasive tone. Jesus, it's almost louder with the windows closed. How many babies do they have over there anyways? I paused and thought about his question, and I listened. I hadn't realized, but he was right. The crying didn't sound like one infant. It sounded like a whole chorus. I can do it if you want, I muttered, but he shook his head. No, it's okay. I'll go. You went last time. He pulled back the covers and got to his feet, reaching for his pants next to the bedside table. I sat up and watched him get dressed, and once he had kissed me and walked downstairs, I stood up to peer blearily through the bedroom window. It was raining that night, the first rain we'd seen since moving in. It made the neighbor's house look much older than it was, almost like a haunted house. In the darkness and the storm, it almost looked dilapidated. I watched my husband tread through the mud, smiling at how goofy he looked carrying our purple umbrella. I watched him march up the front steps, shaking the water off of himself and knocking on the front door. I remember it so vividly. It wasn't a dream. I remember him knocking and then, so quickly, it was unnatural. The front door opened. I didn't see who was behind it, but I saw a bright flash of light and heard a deafening gunshot, and my husband fell to the porch. His chest was eviscerated. Blood and guts spewed out on the wood. My husband's warm body still twitching. I remember staring, shaking in complete shock. I remember seeing curtains parting from the corner of my eye. But I couldn't pull my eyes away from his body. I remember everything going black, like static taking over my vision, and falling. I was surrounded by red meat and blood, and a sticky white substance. I was naked and wet, and I couldn't move. All my limbs were cramped up against my body. I felt a pull, pulling me, sucking me down into the redness and the darkness. I heard a voice, a woman's voice, muffled and distant, screaming and sobbing. No, I don't want to, please. I don't want any more. I saw a bright light, and I woke up in my bed, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My husband sat up next to me, woken no doubt by my violent cries. He pulled me against his chest, stroking my hair, but I wouldn't stop shaking. It's okay. It's okay. Just a dream. But it wasn't just a dream. I saw it. I had seen him die. It had been so real, so vivid. I was still mourning, still in shock, curled up in his lap. It couldn't have been a dream. She brought me a pie the next day. The wife. James had stayed home from work to console me, deeply alarmed by my reaction to what he thought was just a bad dream. He offered to get the door, but I didn't want him to. I didn't want him anywhere near a front door ever again. I turned the knob with shaking hands, and there she stood, her hair tied up in a messy ponytail, clutching a pie tin in front of her. She was still pregnant. She held it out to me, her smile gleaming and wide, but her eyes apologetic. I wanted to apologize for the noise, she said cheerfully, tilting her head. I hope it hasn't kept you up. It's just so difficult sometimes with newborns. You of all people would understand. I don't have kids, I said bluntly, eyeing the pie. It must have been cherry. It was so red. So red. Remember? She blinked at me. Oh, yes, of course. She held out the pie, pushing it into my hands. Please, take it. I cautiously took it from her. It was so red inside, like the red from my dream, like my husband's guts. When I looked back up, she was still smiling, but there were tears streaming down her face and dripping off her chin. I stared at her blankly. Are you okay? Yes, oh yes, I'm fantastic, dear. Without warning, she opened her arms and pulled me in, hugging me tightly, the pie tin crumbling between us. We're just so glad you moved in. I heard a sound, like water trickling, and I cringed as something wet touched my legs. I pulled back and looked down to see liquid trickling down her thighs, slightly pink and sticky. She raised her eyebrows inquisitively, then looked down at herself and seemed to blush. Oh my, yes, you must excuse me. She gave me another smile, so wide it looked like it might have hurt. Still weeping silently, she looked older than before. I'm so sorry. Again, I'm so sorry. She killed herself a couple of days later. I saw it happen. I felt an urge to look out of our bedroom window around 5 in the morning, and I saw her standing on the roof of the neighbor's house. She seemed to look me right in the eyes before she plummeted. I ran down the stairs as quickly as I could, almost tripping and cracking my head open. When I got outside, everything looked different. The house looked different. Old, like it hadn't been lived in years. The yard was overgrown, the grass swallowing up the children's toys, and the pink flowers on the windowsills were shriveled and brown. The porch was dirty and packed with things, as if only hoarders had ever resided there. The paramedics came after I called 911, and the police, and it occurred to me that it was the first time I had seen anyone other than us and the neighbors on that street. They told me it was a good thing I had called because no one else would have. When I asked what that meant, they just looked at me blankly. No one else lives here, ma'am. One of them told me, as if it were obvious. I stared at her body until they took her away. She looked different. She looked old. Even so, I could have sworn I saw her stomach growing. I heard them call her Jane Doe as they zipped up the black body bag. That was a few months ago. We moved back into our apartment closer to the city, and even though it's cramped here, it feels so much more comfortable. I've been going to therapy, trying desperately to figure out what I witnessed was real or pure insanity. My therapist seems to think it was stress. Somehow, so does my husband. As if he wasn't there. As if he didn't see what I did. He seems different. I've noticed things. like how the mole on the back of his wrist is gone now, and how his hair grows slightly curly when it used to be so straight. I can't get the image of him that night out of my head. His body destroyed and drenched in gore, his eyes still open. I've been throwing up every morning, but I won't test. I'm terrified to confirm what I already know. I met my girlfriend Victoria 7 months ago in a bar. We felt an instant connection and started dating 3 days later. She brought nothing but happiness, the perfect definition of a soulmate. So when I graduated from university, we both agreed to move in together. She's 2 years older than me and was already working, so I moved into her house. However, after moving in, everything went downhill. The first incident happened on the first night of moving in. Victoria works night shifts, so she was getting ready to head out. "Babe, I'm off to work now. Just to tell you again, the neighbors next door get a little cranky at night, so just ignore them," she said sweetly. Yeah, I get it," I responded. I gave her a kiss goodbye and she left, leaving me alone in her house. I sat down on the kitchen table and got to work. For context, I work remotely as a character designer for a video game company. It was peaceful for a few hours until the clock hit 2 a.m. The cranky neighbors began screaming profusely. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it sounded like an intense argument. I tried ignoring it for a while, but eventually the sound became unbearable. Banging was heard on the walls, glass shattering on the floor, followed by more screaming and arguing. So much so that it sounded like multiple voices overlapping each other. I tried blasting music in my headphones, but that didn't help. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, so I called it a night and stopped working. The next day passed by in a flash. I chose not to tell Victoria about the neighbors since it was apparently normal, and I didn't want her to think that it bothered me so much. It was her house after all. Nighttime came and I was watching TV in the sofa when the arguments from the neighbors came again. Thumping, glass shattering, furniture being thrown around. You'd think their house is a WWE ring. Jesus, I muttered to myself. Suddenly I started hearing banging on the door, followed by a blood-curdling scream. "What the?" I said while pausing the movie I was watching. The neighbor was trying to break into the house. That's it. That was the last straw. I got up and went to the back door where the banging and screaming was being heard. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen table in case the man would break the door. Thank God it was locked. Just in case, I leaned against it, each punch crushing my back. My heart was racing. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. For all I knew, the man could seriously hurt me. It felt like an eternity before what I'm assuming is a man stopped banging the door. Concurrently, the screaming stopped, and it was silent. "What the?" I muttered under my breath. There was no way I was going to live in these conditions. I decided that I was going to confront Victoria about it when she got home. With that in mind, I made sure all the doors were locked, windows shut, and went to bed. A few hours later at 6 a.m., my girlfriend got home and laid down in the bed next to me. She hugged from behind and gave me a kiss on the nape, waking me up. "How's everything?" she asked softly. "Were the neighbors loud?" I grunted and turned my head to face her, rubbing my eyes. "What?" Victoria giggled. "How did it go with the neighbors?" I found it strange that she asked me that today, but not yesterday. Maybe it was me being tired. "The husband tried breaking in," I said. "He banged on the door for at least 2 minutes, screaming. I thought that was the end for me. Seriously, Victoria, I don't think this house is safe for us to live in. As long as the door is locked, you should be fine." She smiled sweetly. I gave Victoria a serious look. "Listen, I can't live with these conditions." I tried to say it as nicely as possible. "I didn't even feel safe in the house last night. You're telling me this is going to happen every single night?" Victoria looked down, her eyelids drooping down in discomfort. I felt sorry blaming her for something that wasn't her fault, but we obviously needed to do something about it. I can't fear for my life every night. "I'll call the wife tonight and see if anything can be done." She hugged me tightly. "Okay?" I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, baby. I know it's not your fault, but it's impossible to live in fear in my own house every night." On the following evening, Victoria left for her night shift. Once again, I was left alone in her house. She texted me around 15 minutes later, telling me that the problem was solved and that it should be better tonight. I thanked her and laid down on the sofa to wind down. I ended up falling asleep while watching a movie. I woke up a few hours later at 4 a.m. to screaming from the psychotic neighbors once again. Furious, I got out of bed and prepared myself for confrontation. I was ready to finally get to the bottom of this. However, as I walked closer to the front door, something felt off. I noticed the voices and banging a little closer than usual, as if they were in the same house. It was the first time I ever paid attention to where the sound was truly coming from, but it was still unexpected. Subtle, but unexpected. Following the traces of sound, the screams didn't take me to the front entrance, or to the house next door. They took me to the basement door, the only part of the house I haven't gone into yet. My heart began racing. This has to be my hallucinations. The sounds can't be coming from my girlfriend's basement, right? With my legs trembling, I tried to push the basement door open, but it was locked. It only resulted in even louder screams coming from downstairs. They sounded like a cry for help. "What's going on down there?" I muttered. The thought alone sent shivers down my spine. Thankfully, or unthankfully, my uncle taught me lockpicking when I was younger, in case I was in a dangerous situation where I needed it. Thanks, Uncle Will. So if there has ever been an opportunity to use that skill, it would be now. I took 2 paper clips and started fidgeting them inside of the lock. In just a few minutes, the door unlocked, but it still wouldn't open. I looked around the house for anything I could use, until I found a crowbar. Using all my might, I pushed the door open. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. Instantly, I heard loud, blood-curdling screams piercing my ears. Screams that you would only hear in horror movies. Covering my ears, I forced my way downstairs. What I saw was horrific. Dead bodies of dozens of guys were organized in a line on the floor across the basement. Worst of all, every guy there looked to be around my age, many looking like the exes Victoria had talked about in passing. Above them was a jar. Inside it looked to be their faces with a large glow surrounding them. They were screaming in absolute, agonizing pain. From what I saw, it looked to be their souls. The sealed, trapped souls of innocent men facing endless pain in their afterlife. The stench was unbearable. Their bodies were bled out, as if everything inside of these men were sucked out to leave only their pure skin. Despite that, their faces were somewhat recognizable. Each body neatly placed to keep its original shape. Their names were written in blood in front of each body. Jack, Noah, Michael, etc. Their screams sounded more like loud gasps from up close. The room was so loud I was getting dizzy. The screams only got louder. It sounded loud enough to screech into my brain. My mind went blank, my body shaking at the thought that this was my girlfriend's creation. It got even worse when I got to the end. Another name written in blood, with no body behind it, as if it was still being prepared. Dylan. That was my name. I then got a notification on my phone, a message from Victoria. My heart stopped just by reading it. Hey babe, on my way home. Sorry about yesterday. Let's have some fun tonight.